Earlier today, I spoke to former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, John Sullivan. Here's that conversation. President Trump said today there will be secondary sanctions, biting economic secondary sanctions against Russia in 50 days if something isn't resolved. How does that strike you?
That strikes me as a fairly leisurely schedule, given that the reason that the president is so concerned is that there's a brutal war ongoing with innocent people being killed every day. The better news, I think, today is the United States supplying weapons to Ukraine, paid for by European countries. That's the good part. The 50-day delay, it just strikes me as more of what the President Trump himself said a few months ago. Is this Putin tapping me along? He's tapping himself along now. 50 days, why?
What does it mean to you, and what should it mean to the Ukrainians fighting the Russians that the president has switched on this whole question of U.S. armaments flowing to the battlefield?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good and hopeful sign for the Ukrainians who could use it. It's a pretty grim time in Ukraine now after 3.5 years of, at this point, the statistics are, there are 15 million people at this point, killed, wounded, internally displaced, international refugees. The country's just been brutalized by the Russians. So the Ukrainians could use some good news. There just has to be follow-up by the United States continuing to support Ukraine and, most importantly, keep the pressure on Russia and oppose Russian aggression.
When you hear the president, as he did in a cabinet meeting last week, saying what he gets from Vladimir Putin is, and I will use the terminology briefly, I will shorten it, give it initials as opposed to the full-throated way the president said it in the cabinet room, BS from Putin. Do you really think that President Trump has come to a new conclusion about who Vladimir Putin is and how Vladimir Putin goes about his business?
I don't know. The way I'd characterize it is I think the president has finally realized that he is not going to get anything that he can take to the American people and say, I solved this problem in Ukraine. The war is going to continue on Putin's terms, and Putin is not going to compromise. So I think the president may...
In other words, he misread it with all the campaign rhetoric on end it before he takes office the second term.
Yeah, I think he thought that he, given his relationship with Putin, could have made a difference. It didn't make a difference to Putin. That would, for people who have served in Moscow, dealt with the Russians a lot, dealt with Putin, it's not a surprise. But for the president of the United States to put his credibility on the line and say, I'm going to end this war, and have Putin basically tell him politely, indirectly, go jump in a lake, that's a big deal.
There is a secondary war going on here between the secret services, if you will, or the intelligence services, Russian and Ukraine. Two high-profile killings of Russians and Ukrainians within the last week.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Boy, it's not something new. This has been going on for a long time. And it will continue to go on. Even if the point I've made in the past is, even if major combat operations and if there's a ceasefire, I think Ukrainians and Russians are going to be whacking each other, these types of assassinations, into the future. The parallel I'll draw would be with my grandparents from Ireland. If you think about Ulster and Catholics and Protestants, the IRA has stopped after 9/11 major terrorist attacks. But there's still people getting bumped off, and there are still walls up with barbed wire in Ulster. It's going to be that way in Ukraine, and it's the way Russians fight, and Ukrainians ultimately trace their lineage, their security services back to the KGB, the Red Army, et cetera. So the Russians picked on a smaller clone of themselves.
You know the Russian psyche pretty well. You know the economy pretty well. You know the politics, dictatorial as it currently is in Russia. Can the Russians go on and on and on and on?
Indefinitely?
Ukraine?
No. The Russian economy is going to pay it. The Russian people it will pay a price. It may not be right away. It's taken 3.5 years. The Russian economy is under severe stress. A huge portion of the Russian government's budget is dedicated to the military and the security services pursuing this war in Ukraine. It can't go on indefinitely. Think about the United States experience in Vietnam under President Johnson, right? Guns and butter. Johnson wants the Great Society, fund Great Society programs, but on the other hand, he's sending 500,000 U.S. troops to Vietnam. When the United States has that rampant inflation in the 70s that ultimately culminates with Paul Volcker, the Fed chairman, wringing it out, that all dates back to the guns and butter decisions by the
Which is where Russia is now.
Which is where Russia. So the decisions he's making now are going to that he's made and will continue to make will have an adverse economic impact on the Russian people well into the future. The question is, does it become significant enough that they pressure the government, which would be is an unusual thing in Russia, for that type of popular discontent with the war to manifest itself? We haven't reached that point yet.
Ambassador John Sullivan, always a pleasure, sir.
Absolutely, Major. Always good to be with you.